Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. Today I will be talking about all the books that I read throughout November. November was a pretty good reading month for me. It was very busy with work, but I am very happy with what I did read, and I found some new favorite books. I didn't read any 5-star books, but a couple of them were very close. So I'm overall very happy with what I did read. And I don't want to spend too much time blabbering because I do have a lot of books to talk about. And I just want to quickly mention the books that I am in the middle of, books that I've been dipping in and out of and reading throughout November. And I will continue to read them throughout December. And one of them I'm actually probably going to finish in the new year. At the beginning of November, I started The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell. And I am overall enjoying this. It has been a month now, and it's just long. I didn't realize how long it is. It doesn't look very long, but I think because it's a nonfiction and also written by a Victorian, it just feels a little more dense than Elizabeth Gaskell's fiction. So it is taking me a little longer to get through, and I am also taking notes because I will be discussing this on one of my friends' channels, and we are buddy reading this. So we will be discussing it and posting our discussion on her channel. And so for that, I am taking notes and everything. So it's just been taking me longer, and I'll probably finish this in January, but I am very much enjoying it, and I am finding Charlotte to be a very fascinating person. We do get a little bit of insight into Emily and Anne as well, and Branwell. So I'll probably finish it in January, but I am very much looking forward to discussing my thoughts on it. I'm also rereading Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and I just finished Little Women, and I'm now on to Good Wives. So this one I will finish in December, and I am reading it alongside Marmee, and I just have the dust jacket here. But this book is from Marmee's perspective, just the events of Little Women from Marmee's perspective. So I'm kind of reading them side by side in a way. And what I absolutely love about Marmee is it doesn't feel like just a straight up retelling of Little Women. It's so good. I'm loving this so much. And I'm thinking it's probably going to be a 5-star read. So I'm very much enjoying both of these. Of course, Little Women is my favorite book of all time, and these two I hope to finish in December. But on to my DNFs, and I will try to be as brief as possible just because I do have a lot of books to get through. The first one here is The Circus of Wonders by Elizabeth McNeil, and this one I would consider more of a temporary DNF. I just wasn't feeling it when I picked it up, so I might try this again at some point, and I'm hopeful that I will enjoy it just because I do want to read more circus-centered books, so this one's just more of a temporary DNF. I also tried The Toy Makers by Robert Dinsdale, and this one I was hoping to be just swept away, and I thought that it would be a very whimsical Christmas story set in a toy shop, and while it did kind of have some whimsy to it, I just wasn't enjoying the characters. I wasn't enjoying the writing style, and those are very big things for me. So I just lost interest by the 50-page mark and decided to DNF. Same idea with The Chelsea Girls by Fiona Davis. This one, I just wasn't enjoying the writing or the main characters, so I didn't want to keep reading. And this one I got, I think 50-ish pages in. I got pretty far into this one actually, and I just wasn't enjoying it. And this fourth DNF, I don't know if I would consider it a full-on DNF because I did read the first half of it, and then the second half I skimmed. And I'm not a skim reader. I either read the whole book or I DNF it. But this one I just lost interest, and I didn't count it as read on Goodreads. I did count it as a DNF, even though I technically skimmed the second half. But anyways, the book is A Tale of Two Hearts by Michelle Greep. It is the second in this Once Upon a Dickens Christmas, I think it's called, the series, and I read the first book in November as well, so I will talk about that soon. But the second one I just wasn't enjoying as much, and the romance, I just did not like the setup for it. So I really just lost interest and ended up skimming the rest. Next up, I want to talk about some of the Christmas short stories that I read in November, and I read them all from this collection here, Classic Tales of Christmas, and this collection is huge. It has so many Christmas stories that I had never heard of, as well as some familiar ones. So it's definitely hit or miss for me with short stories, and I didn't enjoy all of them as much as I was hoping to, but there were a couple that I did enjoy, and I'm not going to keep holding this. It's very heavy. But the first one that I read is The Chimes by Charles Dickens, and this one I only gave 2 stars. I did not enjoy it nearly as much as A Christmas Carol. This one I actually don't remember if it was set around Christmas or New Year's, but either way, it's during the holiday season, and it's about a poor man named Toby who is visited by these spirits. He's basically lost his faith in humanity, and these spirits try to show him, you know, what causes people to be evil and make bad choices and things like that. And it was just okay. I thought it was fine. I didn't find any of the characters to be particularly interesting. and it just wasn't as charming as A Christmas Carol. So I gave it 2 stars. I thought it was okay, but not a favorite. And the next 4 short stories that I read, I'm not really going to talk about what they're about just because they are so short. And I just feel like it's better to go into them not knowing anything and just kind of experience the short story with very little to go off of. And a couple of them I read are by Louisa May Alcott. We have Tilly's Christmas and Clorinda's Gifts. I gave both of them 3 stars. I thought they were cute. I did enjoy them. They're very short stories. The same idea with one by Ella Montgomery called The Christmas Surprise at Enderley Road, and this one I gave 3.5 stars, and I also very much enjoyed. It's a very sweet one as well. And I also read The Gift of the Magi, which I gave 3.5 stars. I know a lot of people really love this one, and I did like it. I really liked it, actually. 3.5 stars. It's a good story. Just knowing how much other people love it, I was expecting to be blown away, and I thought it was very sweet. It just didn't get me as much as I was expecting. But there is a short story that I went in not expecting anything, just because I DNF'd a book by this author, which is Dostoevsky. I DNF'd Crime and Punishment, so I was just not expecting to enjoy anything that he writes. But I read The Beggar Boy at Christ's Christmas Tree by him, and I thought it was so sweet. It really got me, and this one I gave 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. So that is the last short Christmas story that I read. I read one mystery book in November, and that is Why Didn't They Ask Evans by Agatha Christie. This one I gave 3.5 stars. I really liked it. I thought it was very fun, and it's mainly because of the 2 lead characters. They were so fun to follow. I had such a good time with them. And this one I'm going to read the back. I do like how short and sweet and to the point the summary is without spoiling anything. While playing an erratic round of golf, Bobby Jones slices his ball over the edge of a cliff. His ball is lost, but on the rocks below he finds the crumpled body of a dying man. The man opens his eyes and with his last breath says, "Why didn't they ask Evans?" Haunted by those words, Bobby and his vivacious companion Frankie set out to solve a mystery that will bring them into mortal danger. I loved the amateur sleuth aspect of the story. Both of the main characters are in over their heads, and it's just such a fun story, and I would definitely recommend. It is a great Agatha Christie story. These next 3 books are all part of a trilogy, and the first 2 books I reread in November in preparation for the release of the 3rd book, and I am talking about the Once a Broken Heart trilogy. So we have book 1, which is Once Upon a Broken Heart. Book 2 is The Ballad of Never After. And book 3 is A Curse for True Love. I reread the first 2 books and had such a good time. I'll be honest, I think these books, they don't live up to the hype as much upon a reread as they do the first time that you read them. There are other books where I can read them so many times over and over, and it doesn't change the way I feel about the books. But these ones, I feel like because I read the first 2 books last year, I did remember some parts, and so I just wasn't as, amazed or anything like that. So the first book, Once Upon a Broken Heart, I gave 3.5 stars. This one I actually enjoyed a little bit more than the first time, so I lied there. The first time I read it, I gave it 3 stars. And the second book, The Ballad of Never After, I initially gave it 5 stars. Upon a reread, it's more of a 4-star book. I still really like it. And then the last book I also gave 4 stars. So in the first book, we have Evangeline Fox, who strikes a deal with Jax, the Prince of Hearts, and it has very big consequences. The deal is basically that Jax will stop a wedding from happening, and it is the wedding of the man that Evangeline loves. But in exchange, Evangeline has to sacrifice a lot more than what she had bargained for, and so the story begins, and it's crazy. It is a wild ride. The entire trilogy is just insane. Honestly, reading these, it's such an escape. Not my typical thing, not really my genre, but it is just so much fun, and I love Stephanie Garber's writing style. I love the worlds that she creates, and I just have so much fun. The only thing is I am not as big of a fan of the angst in her books, and book 2 in particular had a lot of it, and I just wasn't as into that. And then the third book, A Curse for True Love, I was hoping it would be a 5-star, but it was definitely 4 stars. I just think it was too fast-paced to the point where things wrapped up very quickly, and books 1 and 2 I felt like had such high stakes, and then in book 3 everything just kind of came together too easily in a way. So it did disappoint just a little in that sense, but I still had such a good time with the series, and I love Stephanie Garber, and yeah, just so much fun. There was also a historical fiction readathon happening in November, and I did read quite a bit of historical fiction as well, so I'm very excited to talk about each of the books. And this first one here is 12 Days at Bleakly Manor by Michelle Greep. It is the first book in the Once Upon a Dickens Christmas, and this one I had such a fun time with. It has a very, very fun premise. So we have our main character, Clara, who is one of a few different people that are invited to Bleakly Manor to spend the 12 days of Christmas there. She's basically offered quite a bit of money to come to this estate, even though she has no idea why she's being invited, and everyone's kind of there not knowing why they were called, but she really needs this money, so she ends up going. And also invited is Benjamin, who is Clara's ex-fiance, and basically she believes that he stole her family fortune and he was imprisoned for this. And so they're both there and they have no idea why they were brought to this house. So basically there's a bit of a mystery. All these characters brought there, they don't know why. I did give it 3.5 stars. I overall really enjoyed it. I just think it was more obvious, I guess. For me personally, I found it to be obvious who had orchestrated everything and why everyone was called there. And so I just wasn't surprised with any of the reveals. And just throughout, I did lose a bit of interest while reading, but overall it was very sweet, and it has like a second chance romance trope, which I very much enjoy. So I did very much enjoy this book as well. Next up, we have The Siren of Sussex by Mimi Matthews. And this one I gave 3.5 to 3.75 stars. I rounded it up to 4 on Goodreads. I really, really enjoyed this book. The only thing is there were quite a few bigger things about it that just don't sit well with me. But as a story, I loved it. I love Mimi Matthews' writing style so much. And I just know that if this story were, altered a little bit and a couple of things were taken out or kind of not as glaring, I probably would have given it 5 stars. It was very, very enjoyable. This one is about a woman named Evelyn who basically needs to marry to save her sisters from financial destitution. She doesn't have a lot of luck in the ballroom, so she believes that her best chances at snagging a husband will come from showing off her horseback riding skills, I guess, which was very common apparently in the Victorian era. The author talks about it a bit in the author's note at the back. They were called the pretty horse breakers, and so it was just women going through Hyde Park on horseback trying to get the attention of suitable men, I guess. The only issue is she doesn't have proper riding habits to wear while going on horseback, and so she hires this man named Ahmed to make her riding habits. And it was very interesting to see a Victorian era romance between an English lady and a man like Ahmed, who was originally from India. So it was a very, very interesting dynamic. So Ahmed takes on the role of her tailor in a way. And then sparks fly, my typical saying when I talk about a romance book. There are many, many sparks. The very last little paragraph says, pushing boundaries comes at a cost, and not everyone is pleased to welcome Evelyn and Ahmed into fashionable society. With obstacles spanning between them, the indomitable pair must decide which hurdles they can jump and what matters most, making their mark or following their hearts. So I really did enjoy Ahmed and Evelyn as characters, as individual characters. They were so well drawn out and the writing was wonderful. I just didn't like how it felt very insta-lovey and honestly more like insta-lusty. There were also a few mentions of seances, which I really, really like to avoid. Seances and anything like that. I know that in a lot of Agatha Christie books, there are mentions of them too. And if it's kind of like in passing or whatever, like it doesn't bother me as much, but I just think it was a bit much in this book. And the author also talks about it in her author's note about Victorian spiritualism. And so it was a very real thing. I just don't like to read about it. But other than those two things, the rest of this book was utter perfection for me. So I very much enjoyed it, and I'm very, very excited for the rest of the series. Next up is The Silent Governess by Julie Klassen, and this one I gave 4 stars. This one I really liked. It starts in November, which is very fun, so it was fitting for this time of year. It's very autumnal and it goes through Christmas as well, so it was very, very enjoyable. This one is about Olivia Keane, who has to flee from her home due to witnessing some brutal domestic violence, and she ends up overhearing a conversation between a man and his son, Lord Bradley, and it's basically this huge family secret, and she overhears. And Lord Bradley does not trust that she will, keep silent about it. So he decides to keep her as staff at his estate. And she ends up becoming a governess for his cousins. I believe they're his cousins. And so there's that air of the unspoken, the secrets. And he also thinks that she's hiding something from him. I really enjoyed that there were some gothic vibes and just a bit of an unsettling atmosphere to it. Of course, we had some Christmas and fall and winter scenes, which were very, very fun. There were some really good twists and turns and reveals, and the characters were well drawn out, and there were a lot of layers to the story as well. I just feel like it was a bit too slow paced at times, and it is quite long. It's like 430 pages. So for Julie Klassen and for, I guess, Regency romances, it's a little on the long side, but I do think it's one of my favorites by her for sure. We have another 4-star book, and that is The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate. And this one was so good. I picked it up from the library. I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't go in knowing very much about it, and I am just so glad that I read it. It was such a good book. And I don't want to say too much about it. I do think that going in knowing very little, especially about the historical timeline, just makes it a much better experience reading it. This one is dual timeline. It is partly set right after the Civil War ends and then also in the 1980s. And in the historical timeline, it's set in the 1870s, so during the Reconstruction era, I believe it was called. And we have a freed slave named Hanny, and then we also have her former master's daughter, Lavinia, and also Lavinia's half-Creole sister, Juno Jane, that joins the two on this very perilous quest towards Texas. And the 3 girls have very specific reasons for why they are on this journey, and I just don't want to say too much, but it was so well written and so harrowing and just emotionally impactful. And then in the 80s timeline, we have a teacher who moves to Louisiana to teach in this town. It's very poor, and it has a lot of history that is connected to Hanny and her family. And so this teacher, she is basically in the midst of these poverty-stricken students, and it's her journey getting to know them and the history of this town, as well as the Lost Friends advertisements in the paper that were used to help former slaves find long-lost family. And it was just so good, so harrowing. I really enjoyed it. I didn't like the 80s timeline as much, and just in general, at times the plot kind of slogged, but besides that, it was such a good book, and I would highly recommend it if you love historical fiction. And I have 2 more books to talk about. Both of them I gave 4.5 stars. They were so close to being 5 stars, but I just find lately I've been a lot more stingy with my 5-star ratings. But these books were truly so good. I really did love them. The first one here is The Nature of Fragile Things by Susan Meisner. Thank you to everyone who told me to read this one first, because I now know that Susan Meisner is an amazing author, and I'm so excited to read more of her books. This one is about a woman named Sophie who in the early 20th century answers an advertisement for a mail order bride, basically going from New York all the way to San Francisco, and she's originally from Ireland. So she answers this advertisement because she has basically nothing to lose. She is just not in a good place in New York, and she meets this man who is now her husband and his young 6-year-old daughter, who she really bonds with, and it's just so sweet to see. But there's just something about her new husband that just doesn't feel right. And then one day a woman shows up on her doorstep, and it just causes this cascade of events to unfold, and it is quite dramatic. I've seen so many people on Goodreads compare this to an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and that is so true. It was so close to being a 5 stars. The only thing that knocked it down a little bit for me was her husband. The whole thing with him and just that something isn't right. I thought part of what that something was quite obvious. Obviously, like, I couldn't have guessed how everything would play out, but I just felt that that was just a little bit obvious. But I feel like the strength of this book really lies in relationships and friendships, and also in parent-child relationships as well. So beautiful book, would highly recommend. And last but not least, we have Crow Mary by Kathleen Grissom. This was the group read for Historathon this month, and wow. I went in with no expectations. I did not know if I would like it. I didn't know if this would be my type of book. I've never read anything by this author before. And when it was announced to be the group read, I, decided I'll give it a try, but I just wasn't expecting to be blown away. And this blew me away. This one is about a young Crow woman who ends up marrying a white fur trader. And it's basically their lives. It's their journey together through Montana and going up to Saskatchewan, and just all the things that they had to go through. And it is also based on a true story. So I did some research on the couple, and it was just incredible to read about them. This book is set in the 1870s. And like I was saying, we have this Crow woman who marries the white fur trader, and her name is Goes First, but she is renamed Mary. After they marry, they basically witness a massacre of a group of Nakota people. And it was just so tragic to read about. And I just don't want to say too much else, but this book was just amazing. The author did such a good job at portraying what this type of marriage could have been like in terms of the cross-culture aspect and just how difficult it would have been for this woman. I love how the author described the way that the Crow people lived their day-to-day, and it just didn't feel info dumpy at all, but it felt so easy to absorb and picture everything. It was a very character-driven story, so at times the plot isn't very fast moving. It's very, very focused on the characters. It's also in first person, which isn't my favorite. I do prefer third person, but I think it worked wonderfully in this book. It was so perfect. And again, it wasn't quite 5 stars. That half a star, it was kind of knocked off for me just because the lead up to this big event of the book that is talked about in the summary, this massacre, it did feel a little bit long-winded, and then the events afterwards kind of were a little faster paced. So I didn't really like how that was paced in a sense, but besides that, this book was amazing. So close to being 5 stars. I would highly, highly recommend. I do want to quickly mention though that this is about a married couple, and while there are some scenes that I prefer were not in the book, it was not written in a way that crossed my personal boundaries. So take that how you will. I think this book was wonderful. And those are the books that I read in the month of November. I think it was a pretty good reading month overall, and I'm hopeful that December will also be a great reading month. I have felt a little bit of a slump coming on, so fingers crossed that it won't turn into a massive one. Please do let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. I would love to continue discussing the books in the comments. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!